Sorry, I forgot my notes during this podcast, the first 15 minutes, but if you want to hear my spoiler filled review with my notes and everything, it's around the 16-minute mark. Check the notes for all the timestamps you need to know for the podcast. Thank you for listening, and take it easy.
Just a matter of time, I suppose.
Watchmen. One of us died tonight. Somebody knows why. Somebody knows.
I heard he'd been working for the government. Maybe it was a political killing.
Maybe someone's picking off costumed heroes.
John thinks that there's going to be a nuclear war.
What if that's why someone wants us out of the way? So we can't do anything to stop it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the LuckyDog podcast. This is your host, Elias. This podcast is sponsored by EliasRushMedia.com. Today we're discussing Watchmen 2009, a 3-hour plus movie, depending on which cut you watch. I think the regular version was about 2 hours and 40 minutes. The director's cut is like 3 hours, and then there's an uncut, unrated, whatever cut. That's 3 hours and 30 minutes. I'm pretty sure I watched the 3-hour movie, which is the slightly, not the 3.5, but not the 2.5, so it's somewhere in the middle of those cuts. So I can't find my notes for what I took for this movie, and it's driving me absolutely insane. I've looked through my entire notebook that I generally keep everything in, and I just can't seem to find where I put down all my notes, and so I don't have my specifics on this movie at this time, so I might have to go back and re-record this or add additional content to this, because it's just driving me up the wall. There's some really good stuff in there. So I'm just gonna talk about this movie very briefly, lightly. I don't have my notes, so it's really irritating for me at this moment. But yeah, I decided to go back and watch the Watchmen 2009 movie, mostly because obviously HBO has revitalized the HBO's Watchmen series this year, and I've really enjoyed the take they've had on this show. I've been way more hesitant to covering that show as a whole, mostly because it's has so much mythology and history that is ingrained in the story, and so I'm kind of dancing on pins and needles on whether I should have covered it or not. And so I might do a full season wrap up of the HBO series, but I wanted to kind of go back and see what the movie was all about, because I'd seen bits and pieces of it, but as a, I don't know, like let's just say I was in the middle of high school during 2009's Watchmen release, so it's quite an adult, quote unquote, comic. It's not your typical superhero action flick. It's shot almost what I think I wrote in my notes is like a superhero art house film. It's kind of surprising how much leeway they gave Zack Snyder on this movie, and I am one of those people that can very much see Zack Snyder's visual potential, and also can acknowledge that he has flaws within his storytelling methods. Now, I think that Watchmen 2009 might have put him on the map more than others, especially he's best well known for 300, unfortunately Sucker Punch, about 3/4 of Justice League, and Man of Steel. And so many people will have things to say about Zack Snyder. I'm not here to bash Zack Snyder at all. I'm mostly here to probably compliment on him as a director within this specific movie. I was very not happy with the Batman v Superman movie, so it honestly is surprising that this came from the same guy. David Hayter is on the screenplay. Alex Teese is on the screenplay. David Hayter is best well known for being mostly an actor in most things. He was also a writer on X-Men 2. And he, is joined by Alex Teese on the screenplay, who is best known for most recently doing Superfly, writing on that movie. And David Gibbons is the graphic novel's illustrator. Alan Moore is uncredited on all of his work regarding Watchmen. He is the creator of the graphic novel, and he pretty much is anti-Hollywood, so he does not agree in the ways that his work has been interpreted in Hollywood. So I'm pretty sure he's not happy with the HBO's show either, and he's definitely not happy with Zack Snyder's interpretation. So this movie stars Jackie Earle Haley as Rorschach, Patrick Wilson as Night Owl, Carla Gugino as Silk Spectre, regular. We also have Malin Ackerman as the second Silk Spectre, so the Sally Jupiter's daughter, Laurie Jupiter. We also have Billy Crudup as Dr. Manhattan / John Osterman. Matthew Goder as Ozymandias or Adrian Veidt. And Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the terrible Edward Blake / the comedian. So this movie it's a dense one. So yeah, I see on IMDb that it is the theatrical version was 2 hours and 42 minutes, and the version I watched was about 3 hours. It's crazy because now we don't exactly consider a 3-hour movie to be terribly, or a 2 hour and 42 minute movie that long. 3 hours seems to be the new threshold to hit, with movies such as The Irishman at like 3.5 hours, and Avengers Endgame, at around 3 hours. So, this kind of takes from that long, short mini form series. So when I say that, this movie is almost chopped into 3 separate parts. I don't have exactly the information that I was going to say about that, but the movie is focused on kind of like a superhero whodunit. Now, it's very loosely based in a way when I say that. Here is the synopsis. In 1985, where former superheroes exist, the murder of a colleague sends active vigilante Rorschach into his own sprawling investigation, uncovering something that could completely change the course of history as we know it. So, there are many interpretations of this movie that you can... Well, there are many themes and ideas that happen within this movie. First of all, I think that Zack Snyder brings a very interesting visual style and atmosphere regarding the look and feel of these quote-unquote superheroes. I think the atmosphere and music are the things that are punching this thing forward and giving it actively good pacing. And the fact is, this movie is all done on a $130 million budget. In comparison to the major superhero movies we're getting today, I think this is a fantastic looking movie. I'd say there's only 1 or 2 quibbles I had with the special effects, mostly regarding Dr. Manhattan's growing effect. But other than that, I thought the range of effects for the $130 million budget we got is pretty damn good, and the action in this cannot be understated enough. I mean, it is gorgeous to see some people get their ass kicked in this movie. I mean, that's one thing that Zack Snyder knows how to film, is some pretty decent action, And so that's where I think this movie really is strong. It's in the atmosphere and the cinematography, the coloring, and the way that this movie makes you feel. It's definitely a movie that makes you think as well. It's kind of the anti-Batman, anti-Superman. There's this law that has come into play within the world that is saying, basically badges over masks, which mean they don't want vigilantes out there running, dealing justice. This movie also covers what is known as the Minutemen. And so, as a non-comic book reader myself, I had no idea what the Watchmen universe was kind of before watching the HBO series, and I had, very little knowledge before. And so, I wanted to go back and kind of understand. The HBO Watchmen series is very much taking place in present day, as where this movie is taken back in the 80s, and even throwing this back even in the 40s and 30s and 40s. And also the HBO show is touching a little bit on that as well. So, of the earlier days, kind of where the Minutemen were heavily involved. Now, the two are not intrinsically linked. There are things from the Watchmen movie, the 2009 movie, that have no place in the HBO series. So I'm going to try to navigate my way between those two, because they very much take place in the same realm, but not necessarily the same universe, because there's things that happen within the comic book that the HBO series is taking for canon, where the show, where the movie decided it was too ridiculous. I'll explain a little bit later. But yeah, so overall, I was actually pretty pleased with the majority of this movie. I'd say it only kind of stumbles around the third act, where the believability kind of is thrown a little bit out the window, and I wanted a little bit more resolution to the very end. So, since I don't have my notes, I don't have too much else to say. I'll attach in the show notes if I end up, adding additional detailed knowledge of what I was thinking during this movie, if I can find my fucking notes. So it's driving me nuts. All right, let's hop in the spoiler section of Watchmen 2009. So let's discuss basically my main issue with this movie. It's the third act problems, maybe a little bit of the way they treat people of color and women. Obviously, that might just be because it's a old school movie, but who actually knows what the decision making was in for the majority of that. Although I will say there is a major point in the comic books where Adrian Veidt decides he needs to make a major disaster happen within the world so that it brings everyone's solidarity to, brings them together, so that it shows that, we can all come together as a species, as a human, so that it'll stop war. And so what Adrian does in the movie, he decides to create basically some sort of explosion, some sort of nuclear something or another. I tachyon something. I couldn't exactly tell you. I've watched this 2 or 3 times. I watched the end a couple times, and I still can tell you exactly what happened. But essentially, he destroyed the lives of 3 million people, which is kind of supposed to be reminiscent of like the 9/11 attacks. And so they want someone to blame, and so naturally they have the government blame Dr. Manhattan, which it's shown throughout the movie that he might be the cause of other catastrophes, such as, obviously he was part of Vietnam within the war, but other things could be such as his best friend died of cancer, his previous girlfriend is suffering from cancer, and there's this big lingering question of, is Dr. Manhattan cancerous? Is, there's very much this lingering question of that character. And so I didn't really quite explain the full intent of the movie, but it is broken up in three halves. And the first half is the very much the whodunit of Rorschach going through the Minutemen, kind of as a detective, almost as if he's like the detective side of Batman, and he's going to see what happened to the comedian and all these obstacles he has to go, climb over. And there's a lot of flashbacks that happen throughout this movie as well. I didn't really talk about the editing, but I was really impressed with the editing through this movie as well. It tells a story in a way that it's showing you things at the beginning. Rorschach's mother treats him kind of terribly, which is another knack I had a little bit against that. But we don't exactly know what that means when we first see it, but later we do. Also, facts regarding the comedian and how terrible of a person he was, that's kind of revealed. So what do you know? I've found my notes. They were digitally written instead of in my actual handbook, my notebook. I'll run down real quickly what I was meaning to say at the beginning of this podcast, but just a couple of the pros, a couple of the cons, some of the more detailed stuff that I had written down. The pros for this movie, Watchmen: the music, the atmosphere, the iconography, the action, the color, editing, set designs, costuming, score. I thought all of those worked extremely well within the universe of the 2009 Watchmen. Some of the cons that I was not too crazy about were in spoiler section by now, obviously. The Richard Nixon at the beginning, the special effects on the growing of Dr. Manhattan didn't especially age that well for me personally, but the rest of his stuff looked okay. The treatment of women in this movie is it's harsh. Rape, assault, etc. Towards the end of the movie, there's a couple of gang members that I believe kill, what's his name? Is his name Night Owl? And they are kind of like racist stereotypes of like an Asian gang or something like that. And it looks a little ridiculous. Not really sure why that was there. The third act, Dr. Manhattan is set up by Adrian Veidt he's set up by Adrian Veidt, and it is made to look like he's destroyed a large segment of New York, which is also reminiscing on the 9/11 of it all, callbacks of it all. The problem with this third act for me personally in this movie, I know that originally it was supposed to be some sort of crazy looking jellyfish that was supposed to be the cause of all of the root of humanity, getting wiped out, or 3 million people getting wiped out. But they changed it to make it look like it was Dr. Manhattan. And to my knowledge, I like I said, I've not read the comics or anything like that. This is where it was changed for the movie. And my only problem with this third act is we lose 3 million people, and at the end of this movie, it still feels like there's some sort of nice, tidy ending. However, when we lose 3 million people, there's only like 2 or 3 people that we can really resonate with on the street that are actually getting quote unquote obliterated into, wherever. I think there's like 2 or 3 like red shirt characters that have been in the movie for less than 2 or 3 lines that are focused on in this final third act. So when we lose these 3 million people, we don't really give a shit about who we lost. At the very end, what's his face? Watchmen. Patrick Wilson starts beating the shit out of Adrian Veidt, and then he just stops. It doesn't really compute with me personally. I can see why a lot of people have an issue with this movie when it comes to the very end. it really does feel like there's this rise to becoming there's this rise to the end of the movie, and then at the very end, the God character, Dr. Manhattan, is turned on the side of Adrian Veidt, because Veidt says, if we all come together as a world to fight a single entity, then we will have defeated, or we will have rid the world of nuclear war. And so, because Dr. Manhattan can see the future, or his immediate future, I guess that's why he agrees to go along with it and ends up taking out Jackie Earle Haley's Rorschach's character. It's quite a different type of ending for, I don't know, the majority of superhero films, Majority of the films, the good guys normally win. But in this movie, it's very much, the good guys are part of the problem, but also part of the solution. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Anything else that we can cover specifically from this movie? I know this is kind of a funky review because finding my notes kind of puts a little, some details in there that I wasn't originally talking about. Let me talk about just a couple things. The intro of this movie, I'm recording this in 2 different segments, so I can't really remember exactly if I said that or not, but the intro was amazing. I thought it was interesting that Adrian Veidt sold his image and his likeness, so he becomes famous as a superhero, and they're making figurines and stuff like that, kind of probably what a lot of people would do if they were a real life superhero, or some people would. Vietnam scene with Dr. Manhattan was beautifully terrifying, with him just obliterating everybody. The comedian obviously is horrible, and the sexual assault is hard to watch, because it's not only a sexual assault, but it's like a quote unquote super villain sexual assault. So it's like Silk Spectre is getting slammed into the table and getting slammed onto the floor, and then we're getting these 300 style, Zack Snyder speed up, slow down punches into the gut. It is hard to watch. One of the more interesting concepts I thought this movie was introducing was badges over masks, which is something the HBO series has been talking about. Wearing masks in the Watchmen universe of the movie has become outlawed, and there's very much a pro, police, sector within this, or there's pro police ideology within this movie. But they also kind of touch again on that in the HBO series as well. And talking about, what if there was an extremely liberal president, or an extremely right-wing president, or an extremely, if we fall too far into one of these, political realms, what are the repercussions of that? HBO goes, Watchmen was, there's at the very first scene, one of the very first scenes is the police on that show have to get approval to use their gun. And so I could definitely see in a very far left leaning country, if we were, then, in some scenarios, I could see that police would have to get protocols to use their weapons. And in some scenarios, that would be great. We don't want them popping off just random desk pops and whatnot. We don't want police just shooting at anything. And that's obviously what we would hope it would cause, or we would hope it would curb, just random shootings like that, so that they have approval for it. But on the other hand, it also shows, what if they are unable to get to their weapon in time? What if they're unable to, defend themselves? So they are definitely walking the line of the political spectrum, the left-leaning, right-leaning kind of thing. All right, what else do we have here? Okay, so Dr. Manhattan's sex scene is interesting. He can be in multiple spots at once. This character is absolutely fascinating. I love to just hear all of the different types of rules this guy has written for him as a character. And Billy Crudup, I thought, does an excellent job. Just I don't know exactly if they created a whole new body for him, because I'm almost guaranteed that's not Billy Crudup's body. He's not that jacked. So I guess they kind of use his face and his voice. But we find out through the sex scene with him and Laurie Jupiter that they are... he's able to be in multiple places at once. And not only that, he can basically multiply himself while they're in bed. Which gets probably some people really excited and other people that might freak out. I personally think it's kind of cool that he's able to, to complete multiple tasks at one time. And I know it's probably... the problem with it is trying to understand that as a human just really doesn't make sense, because us as humans aren't super multitask enabled like he is. Like, we can't build a nuclear warhead while having sex with our spouse or something like that. It's just not how that works, because we're human like that. So let's just say the one thing about trying to understand Dr. Manhattan's power is that it's somewhat self-evident in the HBO Go series, the HBO streaming series Watchmen, that he's not always 100% focusing on where he is in the present. Like, if he's working on Mars, if he's constantly living all parts of the timeline simultaneously, which is it's really hard to figure that out or to break that down, but it's definitely a way that it would show that he would be distracted as a character, constantly absorbing new information and living all parts of the timeline at once. In the HBO Go series, you can tell that he's not present always. He's he's off doing different things in different parts of the timeline, and you can tell that he's just not engaging with the people around him like he would be if he was president. So I thought that was just one really interesting thing to catch for the Dr. Manhattan storyline. What else do we have for the notes real quick? The sex scene, the cancer. Okay, so there is speculation. I think that Adrian Veidt through this movie kind of incepts the idea that he pushes the idea that Dr. Manhattan causes cancer, and there's this major scene where they're trying to interview him on stage, and they bring his girlfriend, his best friend on. They bring his girlfriend on stage, and then they confront him about his one of his best friends dying from cancer, and it really does look like that he might be the cause of it, and the way that is shown through the editing of the fighting. I believe it was Laurie Jupiter and Dan Dryberg, and they're kind of whooping ass. I think they're going through a prison or something like that at one point. Sorry, it's before the prison riot. It's they're going to save, I don't know, a couple of people, I think, from a burning building, I believe. And it's edited between that and Dr. Manhattan being interviewed. And I think that the tonal shifts absolutely work. We're seeing some people whoop some ass and some action, but we're also seeing the unfolding of a storyline of someone as interesting as Dr. Manhattan. And very much through the second half of this second hour of this movie is very much the Manhattan story, and honestly, it's my favorite hour of the movie. When they're describing the background of Dr. Manhattan and like the symbol that he came up with, we find out, he's really heavily involved as I think his father was a clockmaker and was trying to, always trying to teach him how to build clocks. And so I always thought that the symbol on his head was from the clocks, or it looked like a clock symbol to me, but it could be something else. Someone said that on IMDb it's like some hydrogen model or something like that, proton something, I don't know, maybe something scientific or chemistry related, which I am neither of those. But I do like that little symbol that he puts on his forehead. And in the movie, he says that he does it because of the marketing, quote unquote, marketing boys say he needs a symbol. And I really like that because that's exactly what they would say if, in the real world, they probably did say that. There probably really were marketing people behind the Watchmen comic saying, "Hey, we need symbols for these people. That these, these are really interesting figures, but we need to have symbols and iconography that can really stick with them." And I think that symbol on Dr. Manhattan's forehead is one of them. One of the big parts of this movie is that they bring to light, they say that God exists and he is American. I think that this movie definitely comes at a time where it's kind of I'd say it's before we really got critical about living in the United States. I think there was a long time after 9/11 where it was very heavily implied that we wanted to undeniably say that, I'm American and I'm proud. And of course, I was a lot younger during the early 2000s, so I could be a little bit wronger depending on which side you're leaning. But honestly, this is right before, I think, that the time that we really wanted to start criticizing us as a country, and not just criticizing. I think criticizing sounds a little bit too hard, but maybe having some self-reflection on our country, because this movie very much feels rooted in 2009. I think that even though that they're talking about, Rorschach's talking about owning the libs and stuff like that, there really is a view of this movie that stays in 2009 for me specifically. Just the ideology we have reflecting our country, and I didn't realize that there was going to be that big of a reflection within the movie. I thought it was, when originally watching The Watchmen, I thought it was just going to be mostly focused on these people and the investigation of the death of a colleague. But really, it becomes so much more expansive than that. We learn about, quote unquote, revisionist history. We're talking about the Vietnam War, the Cold War, and we're talking about all the other big political intrigues that happened through the mid-1900s. And so, yeah, I was not expecting all of that behind the scenes. So let's finish this up real quick. In this movie, they talk about liberals are referred to as communist, which I guess that was the quote-unquote way to categorize another political party. Let's see. Rorschach, let me talk about him real quick. I think I did say that he reminds me of like the detective side of Batman. Not only from the visuals of looking like a detective, the mask is awesome. It's got the Rorschach test on him, and when he's exploded by Dr. Manhattan, it's like the Rorschach blood angel in the snow, which was very cool. I didn't realize that at first. I had to listen to a Bald Move podcast to listen to that, to learn that. Rorschach, his mother, bullies the hell out of him. Just terrible mother, and bullied by other bullies. And so that's kind of where he started to, fight back, as Walter Kovacs. The action in this felt very loosely based on Korean action films. Some of it reminded me a little bit of The Raid. I think The Raid came out a couple years, I think around 2009, if not 2009. I might be a little off. Let me see. The Raid. Yeah, The Raid Redemption was 2011. So it came out right after this. Let me see. Some of the small details, like when Archie, the flying owl head thing or whatever, that Night Owl flies in, I like the detail in this movie. I don't know if I discussed it enough in the first half of this, but there's so much detail that goes into the background, the set dressing, the small things like the trophies that are etched in, the photographs, the newspapers, all the small things in the background in this movie, all reward for a repeat watch. And so you're constantly getting new stuff. And I'm sure after you read all of the comics, you learn a ton of different things as well. If you're on YouTube watching or listening to this, comment down below and tell me what you thought about Watchmen 2009. Does it hold up? Did you like the movie originally? Have you not seen it? What's what? But yeah, and anything I got wrong with this, let me know. Comment down below. If you're like, dude, what the hell are you talking about? It's it's Rorschach, not the comedian, or comedian, not Rorschach. It's like there's tons of mythology about this specific property that it's so easy to get wrong. I apologize for that. I'm not trying to spread misinformation or anything like that. Mostly just stuff that I've gained from the film, all opinion based, all just things that I've noticed that I really did or didn't like about the movie. Small things like the Silk Spectre and the Adventures of Acme Crushman or something like that. The small comic book details. Like, I have no idea if that was really in the original comic book or not. So yeah, it was great rewatch. I think this is a fantastic companion piece to Watchmen. Though it's a fantastic it's like a prequel to the streaming show on HBO, and that's basically why I went back and rewatched it. I wanted to check it out. But thank y'all for watching, listening, The Watchmen. Be sure to check out all the other LuckyDog podcasts. LuckyDog podcasts on SoundCloud, Apple iTunes, Google Play, Castbox, Overcast, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Instagram, all the social medias. Why can't there just be one? There's just so fucking many. But yeah, check us out on there. Full podcast libraries on SoundCloud. You already know what it is, what it ain't, what it is, what it ain't. PayPal.me/LuckyDog podcast for all donations. We could not do this podcast without your help and your support. This podcast is sponsored by EliasRossMedia.com, photo, video, digital media production. Thank you for listening, and take it easy. Remember, nothing ever truly ends.
Why would I save the world? I no longer have any
I
stake in
definitely got that quote wrong.
Do it for me.
Is it nothing ever ends? I think it's nothing ever ends. Ah, fuck it.
The world will look up and shout, "Save us." And I'll whisper, "No."